The wife caught her husband red-handed, hands stuck in her skirt. Before he could explain, I smiled in triumph. Still beneath her skirt, before he could speak, I smirked and said, "You seem to have really gotten her going." His face turned pale before he dashed out of the restaurant. The crystal chandeliers of Amour and EA sparkled like captured stars, casting delicate shifting patterns across the plush red velvet walls. The air was filled with the rich scent of aged wine and truffle risotto, blending with the low hum of conversation. It was the kind of place that promised intimacy, luxury, and discretion. Gabrielle Dupont adjusted the strap of her emerald green dress, her polished nails brushing the edge of her wine glass. Across the table sat Julian, his cobalt blue suit flawless. His smile was charming enough to disarm anyone who didn't know him as well as she did. Tonight, though, she noticed something different in his demeanor, a flicker of hesitation in his usually effortless charm. He was distracted, glancing at his phone too often, and eyeing the restaurant entrance as if expecting someone. "Are you nervous, Julian?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, her voice a perfect blend of curiosity and concern. Julian's laugh came a beat too late, and it didn't reach his eyes. "Nervous? Of course not. It's just work. You know how it is," he replied. Gabrielle's lips curled into a soft smile. She knew exactly how it was. The subtle cues were like whispers in a silent room. The way his fingers tapped against his wine glass, the faint sheen of sweat on his temple despite the room's perfect temperature. Something was off, and Gabrielle was done ignoring it. The moment his phone buzzed on the table, her suspicions deepened. Julian glanced at it, his jaw tightening, then slid the phone into his pocket, the movement almost too quick. Gabrielle raised her glass, the clink of crystal piercing the quiet tension between them. "To us," she said, her eyes locked on his. Julian met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "To us," he echoed, but his voice wavered. Gabrielle sipped her wine, savoring the taste. The game had begun, and Julian didn't even realize he was the one being played. It wasn't one single moment that shattered Gabrielle's trust. It was the accumulation of small things. The scent of unfamiliar perfume lingering on Julian's scarf, the unexplained client dinners that ended too late, the way he seemed distracted even when they were together. But the tipping point came on a cold Monday evening when Julian claimed he'd be working late. Gabrielle had been tidying the apartment when she found it, a crumpled receipt in the pocket of his coat. It was from Amour and EA, dated the previous Thursday. She remembered that night vividly. Julian had insisted he was at the office finishing a critical report. Her heart pounded as she smoothed out the paper. 2 guests, dinner for 2. Her eyes caught something scribbled on the back. Elena. The name sent a chill down her spine. Who was Elena? A colleague, a client, or something else entirely? Gabrielle didn't confront Julian immediately. She wanted answers, but she needed proof first. Over the next few days, she became a detective in her own life. She checked his schedule against his alibis and noticed patterns she hadn't before. Julian's stories were unraveling like a poorly stitched thread. Then came the photos. A friend of hers, a photographer who worked discreetly for high-profile clients, sent her a text. "I saw Julian at Amour and EA last night. Thought you should know." Attached were 3 photos. Julian seated with a stunning brunette, their body language intimate. Gabrielle stared at the images, her stomach twisting with equal parts anger and resolve. The evidence was undeniable now, but Gabrielle wasn't the type to scream or cry. She was the type to plan. Gabrielle didn't want a confrontation, she wanted retribution. Julian's betrayal wasn't just a blow to her heart, it was an insult to her intelligence. For that, he needed to pay. Her first move was to contact Na, one of Julian's former lovers. Gabrielle had found her through a series of social media breadcrumbs, likes, comments, and tagged photos Julian had foolishly left unhidden. When Gabrielle messaged Na, she expected hostility, but instead, she found an ally. "He's still at it, isn't he?" Na said during their first call, her voice dripping with bitterness. "I should have warned you." "I don't need warnings," Gabrielle replied coolly. "I need your help." Together, they devised a plan. Gabrielle would lure Julian to Amour and EA, his favorite hunting ground, under the guise of a romantic evening. Meanwhile, Nina would reach out to Elena, the woman from the photos, and another woman Gabrielle had identified through Julian's suspiciously repetitive alibis. The goal wasn't just to expose Julian, but to dismantle the web of lies he'd spun around all of them. On the night of the dinner, Gabrielle dressed carefully, choosing a dress Julian had always admired. Her demeanor was warm, affectionate, even playful. nothing to suggest the storm brewing beneath the surface. As they walked into the restaurant, she leaned into his arm, smiling at the maitre d'. Julian seemed at ease, the perfect picture of a devoted boyfriend. He had no idea what was coming. The first twist came halfway through their meal. Gabrielle noticed Julian's gaze flick toward the entrance, his body stiffening. She followed his line of sight and saw her, a striking brunette in a scarlet dress, the same woman from the photos. Elena. Julian's face drained of color as she approached their table, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Julian, she said, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby diners. Fancy seeing you here. Julian fumbled for words, but before he could respond, another voice chimed in. Oh, Julian, you didn't think I'd miss this, did you? Gabrielle turned to see Na striding toward them, her expression a mixture of anger and triumph. Behind her was a third woman, a blonde Gabrielle didn't recognize but had learned about during her investigation. The restaurant went silent as the three women surrounded the table. Julian looked like a trapped animal, his eyes darting for an escape route. Gabrielle, meanwhile, leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. What's going on? Julian stammered, his voice cracking. Gabrielle picked up her wine glass, swirling the liquid lazily. Oh, darling, you've been so busy lately. I thought it was only fair to bring your work here to join us. Nina slammed a folder onto the table, its contents spilling out, photos, messages, receipts. The evidence of Julian's betrayals was laid bare for everyone to see. Julian bolted from the table, his chair screeching against the floor as he fled. The women didn't stop him. They had already won. Gabrielle raised her glass in a mock toast, her smirk unrelenting. To the truth. To the shocking revelation. The folder Nina had slammed onto the table wasn't just a collection of photos. It was a meticulously compiled dossier of Julian's lies. Gabrielle had spent 2 weeks pulling everything together, working late into the night while Julian was conveniently busy with work. She hadn't done it alone, though. Her old friend CLA, a cybersecurity consultant, had helped access Julian's work emails discreetly, uncovering messages that were as damning as they were disgusting. As Gabrielle opened the folder, the damning evidence spilled across the table like broken glass. Hotel receipts, intimate text messages, and photos of Julian with not just Elena, but 2 other women. Each piece painted a clearer picture of his double life. The room went silent, the soft clinking of silverware halting as the drama unfolded. Julian reached for the papers, but Nina was quicker, snatching them away. Don't even think about it, Na snapped, holding up a printed email. Do you remember this one, Julian? Telling me you'd leave Gabrielle because you needed someone who really understood you. What a joke. Julian stammered, his usual charm replaced by panic. Nina, that was you. You don't understand. Oh, we understand perfectly. Elena interjected, her voice shaking with fury. You told me you were single, that you were just getting over a bad breakup. All lies. Gabrielle remained silent, allowing the weight of the moment to crush Julian. Finally, she spoke, her tone cold but controlled. You've deceived everyone, Julian, me, them, even your co-workers. Did you really think no one would compare notes? Julian's face drained of color. Gabrielle, please, this is all a misunderstanding. Gabrielle raised her hand, cutting him off. Save it. The evidence speaks for itself. The final blow came when Nina presented one last document, an official report revealing Julian's misuse of company resources for personal travel. It was the same report Gabrielle had anonymously sent to his employer days earlier. The realization hit Julian like a physical blow. His career, his reputation, everything he had built was about to collapse. Without a word, Julian stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair as he rushed toward the restroom. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving only silence in his wake. Gabrielle leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. She raised her glass in a silent toast to the truth. In the weeks that followed, Gabrielle watched from a distance as Julian's life unraveled. The company launched an investigation into his unethical actions, leading to his suspension and, soon after, his termination. His colleagues began to distance themselves, and whispers of his disgrace spread throughout the industry. But Gabrielle wasn't finished. With the help of Nina and Elena, she reached out to other women Julian had manipulated. Together, they shared their stories in an anonymous exposé published online. The article, titled "The Many Faces of a Fraud," went viral in days. Julian's name became synonymous with betrayal, and his polished image was shattered beyond repair. Gabrielle also ensured her own financial independence. Before the confrontation, she had quietly worked with her lawyer to separate their shared assets, ensuring Julian couldn't manipulate her any further. By the time he realized what had happened, her name was already removed from their accounts, leaving him with nothing but his tarnished reputation. For Nina and Elena, the revenge brought closure. Nina channeled her anger into her art, creating a series of paintings she called reclamation. Elena, on the other hand, used the experience to leave her toxic job and start fresh in a new city. Gabrielle kept in touch with both women, their shared pain forming an unexpected bond. Months later, Gabrielle was enjoying the peace she had worked so hard to reclaim. Her days were filled with new opportunities, and her nights were no longer plagued by doubt. Julian had become a distant memory, until one day, a letter arrived at her door. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably his, neat and deliberate. For a moment, she considered discarding it without opening it, but curiosity got the better of her. Inside was a single page filled with apologies and excuses. Julian blamed his actions on stress, his upbringing, and a fear of inadequacy. He claimed he had changed, begged for forgiveness, and even suggested reconciliation. Gabrielle read the letter once, her face expressionless, then folded it neatly and placed it in the fireplace. The flames consumed it quickly, the edges curling and blackening until it was nothing but ash. She didn't need his apologies. Julian had already taken enough from her. Closure wasn't something he could provide. It was something she had already found. Gabrielle sat by the window of her favorite cafe, the warm aroma of espresso filling the air. She gazed out at the bustling street, watching the world go by with a quiet sense of contentment. Betrayal had been a bitter lesson, but it had also been a turning point. She had learned to trust her instincts and value her own worth above anyone else's promises. In a way, Julian had given her a gift, a chance to rebuild her life on her terms. As she sipped her coffee, she thought about the other women who had been ensnared in Julian's web. They were thriving now, just like her. Together, they had turned pain into power. Sometimes, Gabrielle thought with a small smile, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's rebuilding yourself so beautifully that they can't help but regret losing you.